guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have for you chapter 7 and 8 of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So let's get started. Chapter 7, how the adventure ended. Look at what, said Edmund. Look at that device on the gold, said Caspian. A little hammer with a diamond above it, like a star, said Drenian. Why, I've seen that before. Seen it, said Caspian. Why, of course you have. It is the sign of a great Narnian house. This is the Lord Octasian arms ring. Villain, said Rippercheap to the dragon, have you devoured a Narnian lord? But the dragon shook his head violently. Or perhaps, said Lucy, this is the Lord Octasian turned into a dragon under an enchantment, you know. It needn't be either, said Edmund. All dragons collect gold, but I think it's safe guess that Octasian got no further than this island. Are you the Lord Octasian? Said Lucy to the dragon, and then when it sadly shook its head, are you someone enchanted, someone human? I mean, it nodded violently, and then someone said, people disputed afterwards whether Lucy or Edmund said at first, you're not Eustace by any chance, and Eustace nodded his terrible dragon head and thumped his tail in the sea, and everyone skipped back, some of the sailors with ejaculations I will not put down in writing to avoid the enormous and boiling tears which flowed from his eyes. Lucy tried hard to console him and even screwed up with her courage to kiss the scaly face, and nearly everyone said hard luck, and several assured Eustace that they would all stand by him, and many said there was sure to be some way of disenchanting him, and they'd have him as right as rain in a day or two. And of course, they all were very anxious to hear his story, but couldn't speak. More than once in the days that followed, he attempted to write it for them on the sand, but this never succeeded. In the first place, Eustace, never having read the right books, had no idea how to tell a story straight. And for another thing, the muscles and nerves of the dragon claws that he had to use had never learned to write and were not built for writing anyway. As a result, he never got nearly to the end before the tide came in and washed away all the writing except the bits he had already trodden on or accidentally swished out with his tail. And all that anyone had seen would be something like this. The dots are for the bits he had smudged out. I, Ned, to Slee, Argos, Agrons, dragons, cave, 'cause it was dead, and aining so hard, woke up and coo, get off me arm, oh bother. It was, however, clear to everyone that Eustace's character had been rather improved by becoming a dragon. He was anxious to help. He flew over the whole island and found it was all mountainous and inhabited only by wild goats and droves of wild swine. Of these he brought back many carcasses as provisions for this ship. He was a very humane killer too, for he could dispatch the beast with one blow of his tail, so that it didn't know, and presumably still doesn't know it had been killed. He ate a few himself, of course, but always alone, for now that he was a dragon, he liked his food raw, but could never bear to let others see him at his messy meals. And one day, flying slowly and wearily, but in the great triumph, he bore back to camp a great tall pine tree, which he had torn up by the roots in a distant valley, and which could be made into the capital mast. And in the evening, it turned chilly, as it sometimes did after the heavy rains. He was a comfort to everyone, for the whole party would come and sit with their backs against his hot side and get well warmed and dried, and one puff of his fiery breath would light the most obstinate fire. Sometimes he would take a select party for a fly on his back, so that they could see wheeling below them the green slopes and rocky heights and narrow pit-like valleys, and far out over the sea to the eastward and spot the darker blue on the blue horizon which might be land. The pleasure quite new to him of being liked, and still more of liking other people, was what kept Eustace from despair, for it was very dreary being a dragon. He shuddered whenever he caught sight of his own reflection as he flew over a mountain lake. He hated the huge bat-like wings he saw ridge on his back and the cruel curved claws. He was almost afraid to be alone with himself, and yet he was ashamed to be with others. On the evening when he was not being used as a hot water bottle, he would slink away from the camp and lie curled up like a snake between the wood and the water. On such occasions, greatly to his surprise, Reepicheep was his most constant comforter. The noble mouse would creep away from the merry circle and campfire to sit down by the dragon's head, well to the windward, to be out of the way of his smoky breath. There he would explain that what had happened to Eustace was a striking illustration of the turn of fortune wheels, and that if he had Eustace at his own house in Narnia, it was really a hole, not a house, and the dragon's head, let alone his body, would not have fitted in. He would show him more than 100 examples of emperor, kings, dukes, knights, poets, lovers, astronomers, philosophers, and magicians who had fallen from prosperity in the most distressing circumstances, and of whom many had recovered and lived happily ever after. It did not perhaps seem very comforting at the time, but it was kindly meant, and Eustace never forgot it. But of course, what hung over everyone like a cloud was the problem of what to do with their dragon. When they were ready to sail, they tried not to talk of it when he was there, but he couldn't help overhearing things like, would he fit all along the side of the deck, and we'd have to shift all the stores to the other side down below to balance, or would towing him be any good, or would he be able to keep up by flying, and most of them of all, but how are we to feed him? The poor Eustace realized more and more that since the first day he came aboard, he had been an unmitigated annoyance, and that he was now a great annoyance still. And this ate into his mind just as the bracelet ate into his foreleg. He knew that it only made it worse to tear at it with a great teeth, but he couldn't help tearing now and then, especially on hot nights. About 6 days after they had landed on Dragon Island, Edmund happened to wake up very early one morning. It was just getting gray, so that you could see the tree trunks if they were between you and the bay, but not in the other direction. As he woke, he thought he heard something moving, so he raised himself on one elbow and looked about him, and presently he thought he saw a dark figure moving on the seaward side of the wood. The idea that once occurred to his mind was, are we so sure there are no natives in this island after all? Then he thought it was Caspian. It was about the right size, but he knew that Caspian had been sleeping next to him and could see that he hadn't moved. Edmund made sure that his sword was in its place and then rose to investigate. He came down softly to the edge of the wood, and the dark figure was still there. He saw now that it was too small for Caspian and too big for Lucy. It did not run away. Edmund drew his sword and was about to challenge the stranger when the stranger said in a low voice, "Is that you, Edmund?" "Yes, who are you?" he said. "Don't you know me?" said the other. "It's me, Eustace." "By Jove," said Edmund. So it is, my dear chap." "Hush," said Eustace, and lurked as if he were going to fall. "Hello," said Edmund, steadying him. "What's up? Are you ill?" Eustace was silent for so long that Edmund thought he was fainting. But at last he said, "It's been ghastly. You don't know. But it's all right now. Could we go and talk somewhere? I don't want to meet the others just yet." "Yes, rather anywhere you like," said Edmund. "We can go and sit on the rocks over there, I say. And I'm glad to see you are looking yourself again. You must have had a pretty beastly time." They went to the rocks and sat down looking out across the bay while the sky got paler and paler and the stars disappeared, except for one very bright one low down and near the horizon. "I won't tell you how I became a dragon till I can't tell the others and get it all over," said Eustace. But by the way, I didn't even know it was a dragon till I heard you all using the word when I turned up here the other morning. I wanted to tell you how I stopped being one." "Fire ahead," said Edmund. "Well, last night I was more miserable than ever, and the beastly arm ring was hurting like anything." "Is that all right now?" Eustace laughed, a different laugh from Edmund had heard him give before, and slipped the bracelet easily off my arm. "There it is," he said, "and anyone who likes can have it as far as I am concerned." Well, as I say, I was lying awake and wondering what on earth would become of me. And then, but mind you, it may have been all a dream, I don't know. "Go on," said Edmund, with considerable patience. "Well, anyway, I looked up and saw the very last thing I expected, a huge lion coming slowly towards me. And one queer thing was that there was no moon last night, but there was moonlight where the lion was. So it came nearer and nearer. I was terribly afraid of it. And you may think that being a dragon could have knocked any lion out easily enough, but it wasn't the kind of fear. I wasn't afraid of it eating me. I was just afraid of it, if you can understand. Well, it came close up to me and looked straight into my eyes, and I shut my eyes tight, but that wasn't good enough because it told me to follow it." "You mean it spoke?" "I don't know that you mention it. I don't think it did, but it told me the same, all the same. And I knew I'd have to do what it told me. So I got up and followed it, and it led me a long way into the mountains. And there was always this moonlight over and around the lion wherever we went. So at the last, we came to the top of the mountain I've never seen before, and on the top of this mountain, there was a garden, trees and fruit and everything. In the middle of it, there was a well. I knew it was a well because you could see the water bubbling up from the bottom of it, but it was a lot bigger than most wells, like a very big round bath with marble steps going down into it. The water was as clear as anything, and I thought if I could get in there and bathe, it would ease the pain in my leg. But the lion told me I must undress first. Mind you, I don't know if he said any words out loud or not. I was just going to say that I couldn't undress because I hadn't any clothes on when I suddenly thought that the dragons are snarky sort of things and snakes can cast their skin. Oh, of course, thought I. That's what the lion means. So I started scratching myself and my scales began coming off all over the place. And then I scratched a little deeper, and instead of the scales coming off here and there, my whole skin started peeling off. Beautifully, like it does after an illness, or as if I was a banana. In a minute or two, I stepped out of it. I could see it lying there beside me, looking rather nasty. It was a most lovely feeling, so I started to go down into the well for my bath. But just as I was going to put my feet into the water, I looked down and I saw that they were all hard and rough and wrinkled and scaly, just as they had been before. Oh, that's right, said I. It only means I had another smaller suit on underneath the first one, and I'll have to get out of it too. So I scratched and tore again, and this underskin peeled off beautifully, and out I stepped and left it lying beside the other one, and went down to the well for my bath. Well, exactly the same thing happened again, and I thought up to myself, oh dear, however, any skins I have got to take off, for I was longing to bathe my leg. So I scratched away for the third time and got off a third skin, just like the two others, and stepped out of it. But as soon as I looked at myself in the water, I knew I had been no good. The lion said, but I don't know if it spoke, you will have to let me undress you. I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now, so I just lay flat down on my back to let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling my skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peeling off. You know, if you're ever picked the scab off a sore place, it hurts like a billy-o, but it is fun to see it coming away. I know exactly what you mean, said Edmund. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I'd have done it myself the other 3 times, only they hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker, and more knobbly looking than the other had been. And there was I, as smooth and soft as peel switch and smaller than I've ever been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath, now that I had no skin on, and threw me into the water. It started like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious. As soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm, and then I saw why. I had turned into a boy again. You think me simply phony if I told you how I felt about my own arms. I know there are no muscles and are pretty mildly compared with Caspian, but I was so glad to see them. After a bit, the lion took me out and dressed me. Dressed you with his paws. Well, I don't exactly remember that bit, but he did somehow or other in new clothes. The same I've got on now, as a matter of fact. And then suddenly I was back here, which is what makes me think it must have been a dream. No, it wasn't a dream, said Edmund. Why not? Well, they are the clothes for one thing, and you have been well on dragoned for another. What do you think it was then? Asked Eustace. I think you've seen Aslan, said Edmund. Aslan, said Eustace. I've heard that name mentioned several times since we joined the Dawn Treader, and I felt, I don't know what, I hated it, but I was hating everything then. And by the way, I like to apologize. I'm afraid I've been pretty beastly. That's all right, said Edmund. Between ourselves, you haven't been as bad as I was on the first trip to Narnia. You were only an ass, but I was a traitor. Well, don't tell me about it then, said Eustace. But who is Aslan? Do you know him? Well, he knows me, said Edmund. He is the great lion, the son of the Emperor Oversea, who saved me and saved Narnia. We've all seen him. Lucy sees him most often, and it may be Aslan's country we are sailing to. Neither said anything for a while. The last bright star had vanished, and though they could not see the sunrise because of the mountains on their right, they knew it was going on because the sky above them and the bay before them turned the color of roses, and some bird of parrot kind screamed in the wood behind them, and they heard movements among the trees, and finally a blast on Caspian's horn. The camp was astir. Great was the rejoicing when Edmund and the restored Eustace walked into the breakfast circle around the campfire, and now, of course, everyone heard the earlier part of his story. People wondered whether the other dragon had killed the Lord Octavian several years ago, or whether Octavian himself had been the old dragon. The jewels with which Eustace had crammed his pockets in the cave had disappeared along with the clothes he had then been wearing. But no one, least of all Eustace himself, felt any desire to go back to that valley for more treasure. In a few days now, the Dawn Treader, remasted, repainted, and well restored, was ready to sail. Before they embarked, Caspian caused to be cut off a smooth cliff facing the bay. The words Dragon Island, discovered by Caspian X, King of Narnia, etc., in the 4th year of his reign. Here, as we suppose, the Lord Octavian had his death. It would be nice, if fairly true, to say that from that time forth, Eustace was a different boy. To be strictly accurate, he began to be a different boy. He had relapses. There were still many days when he could be very tiresome, but most of those I shall not notice. The cure had begun. The Lord Octavian's arm ring had a curious fate. Eustace did not want it and offered it to Caspian, and Caspian offered it to Lucy. She did not care about having it. Very well, then catch as catch can, said Caspian, and flung it in the air. This was when they were all standing looking at the inscription. Up went the ring, flashing in the sunlight, and caught the hung neatly as well thrown quite on a little projection on the rock. No one could climb up to get it from below, and no one could climb down to get it from above. And there, for all I know, it is hanging still and may hang till the world ends. Okay, that was the end of chapter 7. Now for chapter 8. 2 narrow escapes. Everyone was cheerful as the Dawn Treader sailed from Dragon Island. They had a fair wind as soon as they were out of the bay, and came early the next morning to unknown land, which some of them had seen when flying over the mountains while Eustace was still a dragon. I was a low green island inhabited by nothing but rabbits and a few goats, but from the ruins of stone huts and from blackened places where fires had been, they judged that it had been people not long before. There were also some bones and broken weapons. Pirates' work, said Caspian, or the dragons, said Edmund. The only other thing they found there was a little skin boat or coracle on the sand. It was made of hide stretched over a wicker framework. It was a tiny boat, barely 4 feet long, and a paddle which still lay in as its proportion. They thought that either had been made for a child, or else that people of that country could have been dwarves. Ripperchief decided to keep it as it was just the right size for him. So it was taken on board. They called one side was, they thought it either been a child. Door trooper, she decided the right size for him. It was taken on board. They called that land Burnt Island and sailed away before the noon. For some 5 days they ran before a southeast wind, out of the sight of all lands and seen either fish nor gold. Then they had a day when it rained hard till the afternoon. Eustace lost 2 games of chess to Rippergy and began to get like his old and disagreeable self again. And Edmund said he wished they could have gone to America with Susan. Then Lucy looked off the stern windows and said, "Hello, I do believe it's stopping." "And what's that?" They all tumbled up to the poop and at this and found that the rain had stopped and that Drinian, who was on watch, was also staring hard at something astern, or rather at several things. They looked a little like smooth rounded rocks, and a whole line of them with intervals of about 40 feet in between. But they can't be rocks, Drinian was saying, because they weren't there 5 minutes ago. "And one just disappeared," said Lucy. "Yes, and there's another one coming up," said Edmund. "And near said Eustace. "Hang it," said Caspian. "The whole thing is moving this way, and moving a great deal quicker than can sail, sire," said Drinian. "He'll be up with us in a minute." They all held their breath, for it is not at all nice to be persuaded by an unknown something either on land or sea. But what it turned out to be was far worse than anyone had suspected. Suddenly, only about the length of a cricket pitch from their port side, an appalling head reared itself out of the sea. It was all greens and vermilions with purple blotches, except where jellyfish clung to it, in shape rather like a horse, though without ears. It had enormous eyes made for staring through the dark depth of this ocean, and a gaping mouth filled with double rows of sharp fish-like teeth. It came up on what they first took to be a huge neck, but as more and more of it emerged, everyone knew that this was not its neck but its body, and that at last they were seeing what so many people have foolishly wanted to see: the great sea serpent. The folds of its gigantic tail could be seen far away, rising at intervals from the surface, and now its head was towering over higher than the mast. Every man rushed to his weapon, but there was nothing to be done. The monster was out of reach. "Shoot, shoot," cried Master Bowman, and several obeyed, but the arrows glanced off the sea serpent's hide as if it were iron-plated. Then, for a dreadful minute, everyone was still, staring up at its eyes and mouth and wondering where it would pounce. But it didn't pounce. It shot its head forward across the ship on a level with the yard of the mast. Now its head was just beside the fighting top. Still it stretched and stretched till its head was over the starboard bulwark. Then down it began to come, not onto the crowded deck, but into the water, so that the whole ship was under an arch of serpent, and almost at once the arch began to get smaller indeed on the starboard, and the sea serpent was now almost touching the Dawn Treader's side. Eustace, who had really been trying very hard to behave well till the rain in the chest put him back. Now did the first brave thing he had ever done. He was wearing a sword that Caspian had lent him. As soon as the serpent's body was near enough on the starboard side, he jumped onto the bulwark and began hacking at it with all his might. It is true that he accomplished nothing beyond breaking Caspian's second best sword into bits, but it was a fine thing for a beginner to have done. Others would have joined him if at the moment Ribici had not called out, "Don't fight, push." It was so unusual for the mouse to advise anyone not to fight that even in that terrible moment, every eye turned to him, and when he jumped up onto the bulwark forward of the snake and set his little furry back against its huge, scaly, slimy back and began pushing as hard as he could, quite a number of people saw that he meant and rushed to both sides of the ship to do the same. And when a moment later the sea serpent's head appeared again, this time on the port side and this time with its back to them, then everyone understood. The brute had made a loop of itself round the Dawn Treader and was beginning to draw the loop tight. When it got quite tight, snap, there would have been a floating matchwood where the ship had been, and it could pick them out of the water one by one. Their only chance was to push the loop backward till it slid over the stern, or else put the same thing another way to push the ship forward out of the loop. Ribici alone had, of course, no more chances of doing this than of lifting up a cathedral, but he had nearly killed himself with trying before others shoved him aside. Very soon the whole ship's company, except Lucy, the mouse, who was fainting, was in two long lines along the two bulwarks, each man's chest to the back of the man in front, so that the weight of the whole line was in the last man, pushing out for their lives for a few sickening seconds, which seemed like hours. Nothing appeared to happen. Joints cracked, sweat dropped, breath came in grunts and gasps. Then they felt that the ship was moving. They saw that the snake loop was further from the mast than it had been, but they also saw that it was smaller, and now the real danger was at hand. Could they get it over the poop in? Was it already too tight? Yes, it would just fit. It was resting on the poop rails. A dozen or more sprang up on the poop. This was far better. The sea serpent's body was so low now that they could make a line across the poop and push side by side. Hope rose high till everyone remembered the high carved stern, the dragon's tail, and the Dawn Treader. It would be quite impossible to get the brute over that. An axe, cried Caspian hoarsely, and still shoved. Lucy, who knew where everything was, heard him. Where she was, standing on the main deck, staring up at the poop. In a few seconds, she had been below, got an axe, and was rushing up the ladder to the poop. But just as she reached the top, there came a great crashing noise, like a tree coming down, and the ship rocked and darted forward. For at the very moment, whether because the sea serpent was being pushed so hard, or because it foolishly decided to draw the noose tight, the whole of the carved stern broke off, and the ship was free. The others were too exhausted to see what Lucy saw. There, a few yards behind them, the loop of the sea serpent's body got rapidly smaller and disappeared into a splash. Lucy always said, but of course she was very excited at the moment, and it may have been only imagination that she saw a look of idiotic satisfaction on the creature's face. What is certain is that it was a very stupid animal, for instead of pursuing the ship, it turned its head around and began nosing all along its own body, as if it expected to find a wreckage of the Dawn Treader there. But the Dawn Treader was already well away, running before the fresh breeze, and the men lay and sat panting and groaning all about the deck, till presently they were able to talk about it and then to laugh about it. And when some rum had been served out, they even raised a cheer, and everyone praised the valor of Eustace, though it hadn't done any good in Repucci. After this, they sailed for 3 days more, and saw nothing but sea and sky. On the 4th day, the wind changed to the north, and the seas began to rise. By the afternoon, it had nearly become a gale, but at the same time, they sighted land on their port bow. "By your leave, sire," said Drinian, "we will try to get under the lee of that country by rowing and lie in harbor." "Maybe until this is over," Caspian agreed, but a long row against the gale did not bring them to the land before evening. By the last light of that day, they steered into a natural harbor and anchored, but no one went ashore that night. In the morning, they found themselves in a green bay of a rugged, lonely-looking country, which sloped up to a rocky summit. From the windy north beyond the summit, clouds came extremely rapidly. They lowered the boat and loaded her with any of the water casks, which were now empty. "Which stream shall we water at, Drinian?" said Caspian as he took his seat in the stern sheets of the boat. "There seem to be two coming down into the bay." "It makes a little odd, sire," said Drinian, "but I think it's a shorter pull to that on the starboard. It's the eastern one." "Here comes the rain," said Lucy. "I should think it does," said Edmund, for it was already pelting hard. "I say, let's go to the other stream. There are trees there, and we'll have some shelter." "Yes, let's," said Eustace. "No point in getting wetter than we need." But all the time, Drinian was steadily steering to the starboard, like tiresome people in cars who continue at 40 miles an hour while you're explaining to them that they are on a wrong road. "They're right, Drinian," said Caspian. "Why don't you bring her head around and make for the western stream?" "As your majesty pleases," said Drinian. A little shortly, he had had an anxious day with the weather yesterday, and he didn't like advice from landsmen, but he altered course, and it turned out afterwards that it was a good thing he did. By the time they had finished watering, the rain was over, and Caspian, with Eustace, the Pevensies, and Repucci, decided to walk up on the top of the hill and see what could be seen. It was a stiffish climb through coarse grass and heather, and they saw neither man nor beast except seagulls. When they reached the top, they saw that it was a very small island, not more than 20 acres, and from the height of the sea looked larger and more desolate than it did from the deck, or even the fighting top of the Dawn Treader. "Crazy, you know," said Eustace to Lucy in a low voice, looking at the eastern horizon, sailing on and on into that with no idea what we may get to, but he only said it out of habit, not really nastily as he would have done at one time. It was too cold to stay long. On the ridge of the wind still blew freshly from the north. Let's go back the same way, said Lucy as they turned. Let's go along a bit and come down by the other street. The Wandrinian wanted to go too. Everyone agreed to this, and after about 15 minutes, they were all swords of the second river. It was a more interesting place than they had expected. A deep little mountain lake surrounded by cliffs except for a narrow channel on the seaward side, out of which the water flowed. Here at last they were out of the wind, and all sat down in the heather above the cliff for the rest. All sat down but one. It was Edmund. Jumped up again very quickly. They go in for sharp stones on this island, he said, groping about in the heather. Where is the wretched thing? Ah, now I got it. Hello. It wasn't a stone at all. It was a sword hilt. No, by Jove, a whole sword. What the rust has left of it. It must have lain here for ages. Narnia, too, by the look of it, said Caspian, as they all crowded around. I'm sitting on something, too, said Lucy. Something hard. It turned out to be remains of a male shirt. By this time, everyone was on hands and knees, feeling the thick heather in every direction. Their search revealed one by one a helmet, a dagger, and a few coins, not Colorman crescents, but genuine Narnian lions and trees, such as you might see any day in the marketplace on Beaver's Dam or Baruna. Looks as if this might be all that's left of one of 4-7 lords, said Edmund. Just what I was thinking, said Caspian. I wonder which it was. There's nothing of the dagger to show, and I wonder how he died, and how we are to avenge him, added Rebercheap. Edmund, the only one of the party who had read several detective stories, had meanwhile been thinking. Look here, he said, there's something very fishy about this. He can't have been killed in a fight. Why not? Asked Caspian. No bones, said Edmund. An enemy might have the armor and leave the body, but who ever heard of a chap who'd want to fight carrying away the body and leaving the armor? Perhaps he was killed by a wild animal, Lucy suggested. I'd be a clever animal, said Edmund, but that would take a man's mail shirt off. Perhaps a dragon, said Caspian. Nothing doing, said Eustace. A dragon could do it. I ought to know. Well, let's get away from the place anyway, said Lucy. She had felt like sitting down again since Edmund had raised the question of the bones. If you like, said Caspian, getting up. I don't think any of this stuff is worth taking away. They came down and round to the little opening where the stream came out of the lake and stood looking at the deep water within the circle of cliffs. If it had been a hot day, no doubt some would have been tempted to bathe, and everyone would have had a drink. Indeed, even as it was, Eustace was on the very point of stooping down and scooping up some water in his hands, when Rebercheap and Lucy both at the same moment cried, "Look!" So he forgot about his drink and looked. The bottom of the pool was made of large grayish blue stones, and the water was perfectly clear, and on the bottom lay a life-size figure of a man, made apparently of gold. It lay face downwards, with its arms stretched out above his head. And it so happened that as they looked at it, the clouds parted and the sun shone out. The golden shape was lit up from end to end. Lucy thought it was the most beautiful statue she had ever seen. Well, whistled Caspian, that was worth coming to see. I wonder, can we get it out? We can die for it, sire, said Rippercheap. No good at all, said Edmund. At least if it's really gold, solid gold, it'll be far too heavy to bring up. And the pool's 12 or 15 feet deep. If it's an inch. Have a moment, though. It's a good thing I've brought a hunting spear with me. Let's see what that depth is like. Hold on to my hand, Caspian, while I lean out over the water a bit. Caspian took his hand and Edmund leaning towards him and began to lower his spear into the water. Before it was halfway in, Lucy said, I don't believe the statue is gold at all. It's only the light. Your spear looks just the same color. What's wrong? Asked several voices at once, for Edmund had suddenly let go of the spear. It couldn't hold on. I couldn't hold it, gasped Edmund. It seemed so heavy. And it is on the bottom now, said Caspian, and Lucy is right. It looks just the same color as the statue. But Edmund, who had appeared to be having some trouble with his boots, at least he was bending down and looking at them straight himself, all at once, and shouted out in a sharp voice which people hardly ever disobey, Get back from the water, all of you at once. They all did and stared at him. Look, said Edmund, look at the toes of my boots. They look a bit yellow, began Eustace. They're gold, solid gold, interrupted Edmund. Look at them, feel them, the leathers pull away from it already, and they are as heavy as lead. By Aslan, said Caspian. You don't mean to say? Yes, I do, said Edmund. That water turns things into gold. It turned the spear into gold. That's why it got so heavy. It was just lapping against my feet. It's a good thing I wasn't barefoot, and it turned the toe gaps into gold. And that poor fellow on the bottom, well, you see. So it isn't a statue at all, said Lucy in a low voice. Nope, the whole thing is plain now. He was here on a hot day. He undressed on the top cliff where we were sitting. The clothes have rotted away or been taken by birds to the nest with an armor still there. Then he dived and done, said Lucy. What a horrible thing. And what a narrow shave we've had, said Edmund. Narrow indeed, said Rippercheap. Anyone's fingers, anyone's foot, anyone's whiskers, or anyone's tail might have slipped into the water in any moment. All that same, said Caspian, we may as well test it. He stooped down and wrenched up a spray of heather. Then, very cautiously, he knelt beside the pool and dipped it in. It was heather that he dipped. What he drew out was a perfect bottle of heather made the purest gold, heavy and soft as lead. The king who owned this island, said Caspian slowly, and his face flushed as he spoke, would soon be the richest of all the kings of the world, and claimed this land forever as an Narnian possession. It shall be called Goldwater Island, and I bind all of you to secrecy. No one must know of this, not even Drinian, on pain of death. Do you hear? Who are you talking to? Said Edmund. I'm not a subject of yours. If anything, it's the other way around. I am one of the 4 ancient sovereigns of Narnia, and you're under allegiance to the High King, my brother. So it has come to that, King Edmund, has it? Said Caspian, laying his hand on his sword hilt. Oh, stop it, both of you, said Lucy. That's the worst of doing anything with boys. You're all such swaggering, bullying idiots. Ugh. Her voice died away into a gasp, and everyone else saw that she had seen across a gray hillside above them. Gray, for the heather was not yet in bloom. Without noise and without looking at them, the shining as if he were in bright sunlight, though the sun had in fact gone in, passed with slow pace the hugest lion that human eyes have ever seen. In describing the scene, Lucy said afterwards, he was the size of an elephant, though at another time she only said the size of a cart horse. But it was not the size that mattered. Nobody dared to ask what it was. They knew it was Aslan, and nobody ever saw how or where he went. They looked at one another like people waking from sleep. What were we talking about? Said Caspian. Have I been making rather an ass of myself? Sire, said Reepicheep, this is a place with a curse on it. Let us get back on board at once, and if I might have the honor of naming this island, I should call it Deathwater. That strikes me as a very good name, Reep, said Caspian. Though now that I come to think of it, I don't know why, but the weather seems to be settling, and I dare say Drinian would like to be off. What a lot we shall have to tell him. But in that fact, they had not much to tell, for the memory of the last hour had all become confused. Their majesties all seemed a bit bewitched when they came back aboard, said Drinian to Rhines some hours later, when the Dawn Treader was once more under sail, and Deathwater Island already below the horizon. Something happened to them in that place. The only thing I could get clear was that they think they found the body of one of those lords we're looking for. You don't say so, Captain, answered Rhines. Well, that's 3, only 4 more. At this rate, we might be home soon after the new year, and a good thing too. My bagsy running a bit low. Good night, sir. And that's the end of chapter 8. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please, guys, do not forget to subscribe. Give me a thumbs up, share, comment, hit the bell for notifications. Follow me on Instagram, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. Thank you so much for watching.